It is a pre-recorded segment. So with that being said, if you are here for CEUs, if you're not here for CEUs, it doesn't matter. If you're here for CEUs and you're watching us on YouTube, nope. You need to be on our GoToWebinar system. Dawn, what am I going to say next? We can't hear you. You're muted. Dawn hates when I put her on the spot, Todd. She's done 500 of these, yet she still doesn't remember what I say. Dawn, what do I tell people for the CEUs for the recorded version?
Ray, I'm going to get it wrong. I'm just going to get it wrong. If you need to, you can put your information into the chat, and no, I'm wrong. See?
Okay. If you're here for CEUs, everyone has a question feature. When you're prompted on the recorded version, you'll just put CEU, and that lets me know. And that lets me know the educational organizations we work with that you were here. So once again, use that question feature to enter CEUs. But if you're not here for CEUs, don't worry about it. Continue watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast or whatever you would like to do so. Comments and questions, if you send them to me, I do get them even for the recorded version. I do eventually get to them and I will respond back. So please send away. So with that being said, let me introduce our panel with who I see first, and that is Todd.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Ray. Thank you very much for joining us for this chat here today. My quick 2 cents background here: started conducting reserve studies and reserve advisors in 1999. Pertinent to this panel discussion here today, still enjoy visiting a high-rise each week. I'm a licensed professional engineer in several states. Looking forward to discussion. Thank you, Ray.
I do love high rises. I do. I just think they're so fascinating. They're so complex. Dawn.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dawn Becker-Durnan, and I'm with Acrisure. We are a retail insurance broker located across the country, and I specialize in community association insurance.
And Andy.
Hi, everybody. Andy Sitnick. I am the vice president of our high-rise operations in Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey for First Service Residential. And since you love high-rises so much, I've been working with high-rises since 2010. I live in a very wooded area of New Jersey, and I joke to all my neighbors. They wonder why I don't work closer by, and I say, well, there's just no high rises in the sticks of southern New Jersey. So happy to answer all your questions related to high rises.
And Andy does know high rises because Andy is at our building with his management company, and I think Andy does a great job, and that's why I'm so happy to have him on the live stream. So
thank you.
And I used to love sending Andy text messages when I thought he was doing something wrong. I thought that was great too, but anyway. All right. High rise, capital project planning and reserve study reality. Now, Andy, I asked you what topic you thought would be a good one to start off with, and you said this one. How come?
Well, not only is there, especially in New Jersey recently, but it's also been a thing in Florida. A lot of states are getting towards the adoption of laws revolving around reserve studies and or making sure that our communities are maintaining their buildings, particularly high rises after the unfortunate collapse of that Surfside building in Florida. It's always been a challenge in a high rise because of the sheer magnitude of the equipment and the asset, if you will, even though we don't like to call them assets, but the dollars involved in maintaining a high rise are significantly larger than any planned community or garden style HOA that's in our industry. From the exterior of the building, the elevator equipment, large pumps, cooling, heating systems, you name it. And in some buildings, they even have very unique features like automated garages or, amenities now that are coming in some more of the luxury buildings are just unfathomable to think of how do we reserve for. And it's a challenge. And I think the industry is a little behind in how we deal with this in the sense that we're used to using a reserve study.
You're getting so far ahead, Andy.
And I will slow down.
Oh, you're getting so excited. You're like Dawn with the insurance. You're so excited. You just see how excited he is, Todd? He just loves high rises.
So,
those are like 90% of my slides that I have here.
All right. Well, it's a lot of, it's always a challenge. It doesn't matter what building, whether they're well-funded or not. So, I love talking about it because we don't know the answers, and I learn something new every time I deal with a client.
Oh, Todd's going to have all the answers. He pretty much guaranteed it today. He said any answer you need, he's going to have. Todd, I think the thing with high rises too is that, man, if you screw up, they're big screw ups. And I think that's why people should pay attention to what we're going to talk about, because it's a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's sort of why that increased scrutiny by lending institutions started with high rises, started with the vintage high rises, the larger buildings. That increased scrutiny is probably only going to really accelerate with those type of structures, and a lot more on the line with high rises. If you have a structural failure, you have a structural issue with your facade, could jeopardize public safety. If you have a falling concrete, life safety systems within high rises, it's just a different ball game. It's a different ball game from townhomes.
That's why I want people to pay attention when we're going to talk about. Andy, Dawn's here because not only is insurance very complicated for high rises, honestly, Dawn knows a lot about just about everything. I don't know if you knew that about Dawn, Andy, but there's nothing that Dawn doesn't know either. Dawn, I meant there's going to be plenty for you to talk about too, right? With insurance and reserves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in a high rise, the complexity, and as Andy and Todd both pointed out, it is an immense finance. So with insurance, we're transferring risk, and that's the financial risk of loss. So there's a lot that insurance really wants to know about. And we really deal in sometimes the aftermath when reserves are not properly developed, and also when maintenance is not done.
Andy, how come you can't use the word assets anymore? I meant, you didn't say you can't use it, but why is that out of favor? Is that, do you know
Well, I
why?
guess
Go ahead.
it's more of a personal thing. I mean, in theory, the condo doesn't own anything. You know, because you can't sell off the building. It's just not how it works. Versus a cooperative, by the way, is a little different. There actually is an asset there. From an accounting standpoint, there's nothing on the balance sheet except piles of money. Versus, like I said, a co-op actually is, the value of the building is there. You can actually mortgage a co-op. Sorry. So when we talk about assets, I've had clients say to me, get an asset manager. I'm like, well, there's no value really to the insurance. By the way, Dawn will tell you the insurance puts a value on it, but it doesn't really mean much to us. And sometimes a community does things that are outside what an asset manager would do, meaning we want to keep it in a more pristine shape and do things more accelerated or make enhancements to it because this is what the people wanted versus it's the bottom dollar, best price, etc.
Oh, okay. Andy knows all the latest lingo. He really does. Because Andy, you're out there talking a lot to the entire community all the time, right? I don't want to get too deep into it, but you do need to know the lingo.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy getting up in front of large crowds of curious homeowners and talking shop, if you will. But yeah, you got to understand what's going on now, but also anticipate what's coming and just paying attention to the industry. This is why I like doing events like yours here. Like I join other events. I try to jump in and meet a lot of people and learn it.
I like your description, curious. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. Curious groups of owners at a meeting. All right. High-rise projects are different. I just wanted to set the tone with that. I think we already kind of covered why. I don't think we have to add anything else to that. They are completely different and a lot more complex. Todd, from an engineering aspect, do you agree? High-rises are much more complex for the most part than your average HOA.
Yeah, absolutely. Just think about access. Just to access a location of water infiltration on the 30th floor of a 50-story high-rise, just to get to that spot where you need to do the repairs, often more than the actual repair. That chiller, is it easy to remove and install a new one, or is it very difficult to remove and install a new one? Access plays such a massive role in these costs and high rises. And that's not as much of it certainly is an issue at townhomes, but way, way bigger issue in high rises that you need to account for within your reserve study, your capital project planning.
That's why I think, like, if you're a manager of an HOA or anything, we're not saying you don't have a complex job either. You have your whole different, but I think this may be an interesting webinar for you also, because you may learn how complex these high rises are and how much those managers have to deal with a lot of different issues. Like today, we're having a problem with our elevators. So that's an issue. It's causing a lot of havoc. It's not anybody's fault, but that's what happens. All right. The reserve study is the starting point. Andy, since you kind of brought this topic up, why do I have that as a slide? Any idea? I don't know why.
Well, I can tell you the textbook or the grade school answer is that the community is told to get a reserve study. And it's also sometimes referred to as a capital plan. Okay. I tend to disagree because a reserve study is what I feel it is that you're studying the amount of reserves you need at a certain time frame for a certain future point. Everyone gets it because it's sometimes required by lending. Insurance carriers would sometimes ask for it in their underwriting. Any mortgagee, bank that's going to be mortgaging a unit in a condo or a high rise typically ask for a copy of the reserve study. And it's a really more of a 30, even sometimes 40,000 foot view of the cost of the amount of money you're going to need and when things are. It's a start point, meaning it should, in my opinion, it shouldn't be the only document you use to guide yourself through the capital projects of your high rise.
Who would disagree with you? No one. Well, we'll see. Let's see if Todd disagrees.
Yeah, no. Reserve studies simply allow you to make an informed decision come budgeting season. Simply allows you to make an informed decision, have a heads up as to what projects are coming down the road, their potential times, their potential costs. Again, that allowing you to make an informed decision. You're come budgeting season, you're trying to figure out what reserve contribution to put away. It puts a little bit of science behind that discussion.
Dawn, I will make a statement. If you don't have a good reserve study, especially with a high rise, I think it's unethical. I'm not a lawyer, so I think you're not doing your fiduciary duty. That I'm not an attorney, so that could be true or not true. Check with your own attorney on that. I think it's terrible. I think a reserve study for a high rise is an absolute obligation, whether the owners want to see it or not, or hear about it. Dawn, you do a lot of these. I know it's not so much insurance, but do you agree?
I do. And here's why. So in a high rise, everything's amplified: the cost, the risk, the complexity, the consequences. And a lot of our owners don't understand governance. They don't understand why we do things. But more importantly, they will treat oftentimes their condo unit like an apartment, meaning that maintenance is such an essential thing, right? But also cost. So why it's important for a reserve study is to set that balance of what we estimate or anticipate potential future costs to be, and what we cannot insure, we reserve for.
Andy, that reminded me, for people that may not be familiar, you're very familiar with my building because your company has been managing it for a long time. I remember our pool was out. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was out. And the owners were going on Facebook saying, I want a discount. Like, how do you get a discount? You own the building. Like, who are you getting the discount from? Andy, I don't think people would believe how little people understand when they're an owner, how the building works. Like, it drove me nuts. Like, there's no discount.
Oh, my favorite is that if you have a building where you have first level apartments, they don't want to pay for the elevator. And it's the same thing.
I never even heard that one. Okay, so let's start with what part you should take a look at first. And an audience, this is just my research. It doesn't mean anything. So the panelists are here to set it straight or clarify or things like that. But I like to do it this way, audience, because if you try to research this stuff on your own, you're going to find very similar information that I'm going to find. So this is why I like to go through it. What has changed since the study? Todd, what am I getting at? I'll just let you run with it from here. Point number one here.
What has changed since the study? So you get a reserve study done. You're hopefully looking at that at least a couple of times a year, especially during budgeting season. But as the years go by, some things have changed. Maybe some projects have been deferred. Maybe some projects have accelerated. I believe that's what you're getting at here. And one of the notes here is that there are a number of some other additional possible changes here. Obviously, some of the costs may be coming a little different. Certain projects, the cost is increasing way more than inflation. Some of the cities that I work in, primarily construction costs for roofing projects, facade projects. There's a shortage of labor for people to do those projects, and those costs are way higher. That can create a challenge within reserve studies, but those associations who get their reserve studies updated in a timely manner, we can more gradually build in those increased costs for that association. I just want to make one thing clear. Just because a project is deferred, just because the association defers a project, doesn't mean it falls off the radar screen. Still got to be thinking about that. Of course, we can't get the exact project in the exact year. That's not the point. Nobody can do that. Following the reserve, quote, following the reserve study means following the reserve contributions, not the exact timing of the expenditures. Following those contributions, that's really the key. That's where associations get on a good financial path.
How do you have notes on this? Did you just guess that I was going to bring this up?
I did not. I asked for the notes ahead of time. You wouldn't give them to me.
I know. See, audience, I don't let the panelists have any clue what's coming up. I don't like them to over research things. I like them to be very natural and comfortable. But engineers in particular love to have all the information ahead of time. Right?
Absolutely.
That's why they're engineers. They do such a great job. They need to do that. I had down here, Andy, prices, building conditions, codes, contractor availability, residents' needs, et cetera, et cetera. This is an important one. Do you agree, Andy?
Yeah, but I think very importantly is the board changed. Typically, the board that got the reserve study done 3 years ago is not the board now. And every board has their goals, if you will, and their opinions on how things have been done. And typically, it's not exactly the same as boards of the past. And also, even every community also has a different culture for how they want to pay for things, I'd say. In my experience with some of the more luxury high rises in our portfolio, it's not the fact that, yeah, oh, they've got the money and, it's going to be better, but oftentimes they want you to reserve enough for the $50,000 to $100,000 hits that come every year, every 5 years. But when you got to replace elevators at the tune of $5 million, they just say, hey, write a check because my money guy's making 10%. Why is your condo going to make 3% on my money? And in order to save the amount of capital, your assessments end up having to be higher. So a lot of times it really comes down to the community culture, which is led by the board that's been elected.
Okay, so, well, let me do this with Dawn, and I want to go back to something you said. I'm going to totally jump ahead now. Dawn, on here, my notes say, what has changed with a study? Insurance expectations. I don't know if does that really belong in there? I mean, that's what popped up with my research. I never saw that in reserve study.
Is insurance referenced in a reserve study? Is that what you're getting at? Or
prices? It says prices, building conditions, codes, contractor availability, insurance expectations. I don't think that belongs in there, does it? For a reserve study?
Not in a reserve study,
yeah.
But the insurance, we do care about those items. They're extremely important.
That doesn't belong in there, right, Todd? Theoretically, you're not anticipating insurance needs in a reserve study, are you?
Not necessarily, but Dawn, feel free to jump in here. We are seeing in certain states where insurance providers are taking far greater interest in looking at reserve studies, looking for deferred maintenance, looking for issues that could cause them to be a little wary of that association, even not even writing a policy at times. So that that within that reserve study, showing that the association has a solid financial game plan to take on these projects in a timely manner that minimizes that deferred maintenance, minimizes those critical conditions. Seems like insurance providers are taking way more interest in that nowadays.
We are. And in fact, there are some insurance providers out there that are partnering with reserve companies to offer discounts if you have certain insurance products with certain carriers. We are also, I'm a CIRMS insurance agent, which is a community insurance risk management specialist. And by working with me and a credentialed manager, we are getting discounts through our D&O programs. Why? Because reserve studies are so essential to financial planning, and poor financial planning typically results in claims, as Todd pointed out. You can have insurance claims, particularly against the directors and officers, and that may or may not be covered. I mean, it's really going to be dependent upon a lot of things.
Everybody wants a reserve study now. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you got to have one. You're crazy if you don't. Andy, I'm going to totally jump ahead. Go ahead, Dawn.
My feeling on this is, how does a community really know, or a condo really know what to charge their residents? They don't have that game plan established with a reserve study.
Right. I think it's crazy not to have one. The only exception, I don't want to get into it, is if it's a building where billionaires live, then they don't care because they can just write a check at any moment for any amount of money. And I've seen that in Manhattan, but otherwise you got to have a reserve study. Andy, you said something really interesting that I don't think I've ever heard before. You said you have to anticipate cultural changes within the board. So I think this is an interesting question. I'll start with you, Andy, and maybe you don't have an answer. You may not. How does a current board protect themselves when they're making a reserve study for the future actions of later boards who may not keep up with that reserve study? And there may not be a way to do that.
There really isn't a way to hedge against that. I've had many clients try, or boards try, because at the end of the day, most of the actions a board can take can be undone by the next board. Unless you somehow amend your documents, and which is difficult to do in pretty much any state. That maybe somehow you put that in there, but even then, I think an attorney may even argue that, don't even bother going there with that. It's really more of an operations thing. A good board utilizes their committees to quote unquote train up board members in the future, teaching them or making sure you have those that are of like mind and or like goals can help hedge against that. But it's a challenge. I mean, that's why, some buildings tend to get a little contentious because you've got, either factions or differing opinions that think how things are to be done. And the best thing to do is just everyone should be working out their differences. At the end of the day, it's not worth it. You've got millions and dollars of
All right.
real estate to deal with.
Well, I just realized too, let's face it, a lot of people run for election based on the fact that the board is putting too much money away, which they should be doing. So I guess whatever, there's nothing to really, that kind of stinks. But all right. Real buildings don't follow spreadsheets. Todd, the way this popped up was projected useful life, estimated costs, and replacement timelines may not match what is actually happening inside of the building. Have you ever heard this comment before?
I guess first and foremost, let's take discretionary projects like hallway renovation, lobby renovation out of this discussion for just a moment. Of course, you can't get the exact expenditure in the exact year, but it does have to be reasonable. If within your reserve study, if it's us or somebody else, it's not a reasonable cost, not a reasonable time frame, call them out, talk it through, see if it was a different scope of work, see what happened. Have to be reasonable. There's no reason to hire us. But it's not about, we recommend you focus on the next 5 years. So the next 5 years, what projects does that reserve study provider have on your radar screen? Do you like where it's at? Do you think you need to move it up? Maybe you get lucky, move it back? Because the next 5 years is not a whole lot of time to figure out how to pay for those projects. But the idea is not to go year by year what that reserve study provider has, but be on your radar screen, be thinking about those projects. If we have your roof system 3 years from now, maybe it's not leaking, maybe you can move it out a little bit, but it doesn't get deferred. You're not like you're going to get 10 more years out of it. Maybe you're lucky to get 2, 3, 4 at the very most. Needs to be on your radar screen because it's a big ticket project. Now is the time to start thinking how you're going to pay for it.
Dawn, this has nothing to do with, well, maybe it does, but I like to toss things over to you because I just like to make sure you're paying attention because you're such a good sport about, and the insurance is so important, but it's not always about insurance. Conditions matter more than age.
100%. Here's the thing. If you've been keeping up on the maintenance of the building, it shows. I have high rises that we insure that are ancient. I have brand new high rises that we insure. Some of the brand new high rises look like they're older than the ones that were built in the 60s. So it really depends upon what the board and how the board has maintained the buildings and funded the buildings. And poor maintenance typically leads to an insurance claim. Why? Because someone's going to trip, slip, or fall. Fire systems, that's a big thing that we don't always see being updated. People aren't really looking to it. They think I've got it inspected, but they don't think about the replacement of those systems, the pumps, etc. Todd mentioned the chilling systems. I mean, this is a vertical building. There is a lot of complexity to it. The elevators, as discussed before. So if those items are old and not maintained, there's more likely to be an injury or property damage.
Andy, Dawn's great at segueing things to insurance. There's absolutely nothing you can't throw at her that she can't find an insurance angle. That's because she's so knowledgeable. I meant we're going to do a whole live stream on that, like a game, Dawn, where we challenge you. Andy, a system may be old, but still functioning. I thought of myself also when this slide popped up, but that's another topic. Do you agree with this or not agree with it?
No, absolutely. I've had buildings that, the domestic water pump, the big pump in the basement that puts water into your unit or your apartment. If you do your regular maintenance on these things, it may have a useful life in your reserve study of 10 years, but I've seen pumps that are in great condition go 15. Obviously, you got to anticipate that could accelerate quicker than usual, but you can absolutely outperform what your reserve study says with proper maintenance. Roof systems are like this as well, EPDM and TPO roof, flat roofs, especially if you get your regular maintenance done, you can outperform your reserve study. And facades are a little different. I'm sure I can get into more detail on that. There's so many varying types of facades and methodologies behind how to tackle that you can probably get the best bang for your buck with proper planning.
So Todd, a reserve study, does it anticipate the previous maintenance? Does it include the previous maintenance of equipment in forecasting?
Yeah, a lot of the equipment that was mentioned, domestic cold water pumps, like Andy mentioned, it either works or doesn't work sometimes. It might be old, well maintained, get a good useful life out of it. We absolutely have to consider well maintained equipment, probably going to need a little bit longer useful life. But what wasn't mentioned yet is the other way is true too. Components that are not properly well maintained, you're missing that preventative maintenance, can often get a diminished useful life. It doesn't always go every building we go to, building engineer tells us, hey, I do a great job maintaining all this stuff. It's going to last forever. I do a fantastic job here. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We have to consider the actual preventative maintenance in that useful life. It plays a big role.
So you're factoring it in. You're asking questions about it. You're looking for maintenance records. Are you doing all those things, Todd, or you generally don't? Like, how far do you, it's guys, this is like almost an investigation, right? Is that something that you don't generally do, or you do it, or it costs more money? I mean, it seems like this would play a major role, especially like Andy was saying, in high rises.
Yeah, absolutely. When we walk that high rise with that building engineer, we have to understand the preventative maintenance they're conducting. Is the component maintained under a service contract by professional as well? In fact, post Surfside, a change to reserve studies is they now must include the preventative maintenance that's required to maximize the useful life of that component. Now, not the cost, but just in the text somewhere, what do we think you should be doing that component to maximize its useful life? That's a new requirement.
Does anybody ever go around, Todd, and say they do a crummy job? I mean, what do you expect people to say? Of course, the guy's going to tell you he's maintaining the equipment, right? So,
well, the new building engineer that takes over will tell us that old building engineer did a terrible job. That's when we get that.
I think, and Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of your challenges, like, when there's a piece of equipment with a serial number, you could typically get the age of it. And then it's their keen eyes from the engineering team that can put a condition on it. It gets a little harder when you're dealing with components like roofs, facades, when we maybe don't know when it was put down, or we don't know when the last bit of maintenance was. And the scope of a typical reserve study when it comes to actual engineering hours on the job can really dictate the quality of the condition assessment, if I'm getting that right. Where I've noticed a lot of our boards, they think that, Todd's sending in 4 guys with microscopes and spectrometers to figure out the molecular scope of the brick and mortar, when meanwhile you got a guy maybe with a drone and says, yeah, I mean, it looks like it was repointed 10 years ago. So that's where, you really got to partner with your reserve study specialists to understand what you're getting and relay that expectation back to the board.
That's what I was kind of getting at too, but you're going to get what you paid for.
Condition trumps age. As you had a slide, you have it actually up there right now. Condition trumps age. So if we go up to a modified bitumen roof system, might be brand new. Board manager tells us brand new, but we see a ton of sealant deterioration of the perimeter and penetrations, and we see areas that with membrane bulge around the perimeter, poor terminations. That's all going to play into where we place the project on your radar screen. Condition is far more important than age. Unfortunately, there are times where we visit properties where managers knew, building engineers knew, we don't get that history. That's unfortunate. We need to piece that together the best we can through our non-invasive visual inspection. If we see conditions that warrant invasive testing, like core sampling of a roof, for example, we'll recommend that. But a reserve study is not invasive in visual nature. A lot of talented reserve study providers out there that from that non-invasive visual inspection, they can get a good feel for the remaining useful life, regardless of what we're told the age is.
Andy, do you think it's possible that commentary about you get what you paid for, I mean, that's what I said, but basically it was off what you were talking about. You either pay a guy who just puts a drone up and just guesses, or compared to you hire a company that's really going to dive deep. I didn't even know about the serial number, so thanks for sharing that. I think if you're going to get something out of this webinar today and you're involved at a high rise, that may be it, right? You want to investigate these issues, or do you agree?
Yeah, and a typical reserve study specialist is going to offer you options or levels, as they call them, typically 1, 2, and 3, with being level 1 being we're going to spend they're going to spend more time on your site investigating and giving you a more thorough, but you pay for that because it's going to be engineering hours, either both on the ground at your building or back at the lab, analyzing photos, doing the research, and putting the spreadsheets together. So I rarely recommend that a high rise just quote unquote update their spreadsheet in a reserve study, because condition matters more than age. What happened 3 years? 3 years is a long time in a high
Right.
rise. And yeah, that absolutely
So I wouldn't say like typical company. I would say like quality company.
quality.
Go ahead, Dawn.
I just want to add, insurance does care about age though, especially in the Southeast. We really do have insurance carriers that no matter how wonderful and great the building looks, unless it's completely a gut rehab, which is, I don't know if I've ever really come across that except in New York City, they're not going to consider it after a certain age point. And it's actually pretty young. And in the Southeast, we're seeing some of that age being 1985 and even up to 2006. Pretty scary, but think about that from a standpoint of there are, larger claims with a vertical building. And so the insurance carriers are wary about that.
Dawn, Todd and Andy were making me feel good about my age. And then you just came on and just totally shot it back down again.
Well,
You had to say it, but I'm just telling you. I meant, all right. But basically, okay. Let me take a quick 2-second break to regroup up here. Really, really quick, guys. Lightning round. Unnecessary item you would bring with you to a deserted island. Todd.
Can I go last?
No.
Unnecessary item I'd bring with me to a deserted.
All right. I should never go to the engineers first. Andy.
Yeah.
Sunglasses.
Dawn.
I'd bring a hairbrush.
I'd bring my iPhone. It's so pathetic. So pathetic. All right, Todd, we don't blame you. Engineers like to really think things out. You'd have to make a report. You'd have to get your stamp out. I understand. Did you come up with an answer at this point?
Still haven't come up with an answer.
Okay,
No.
all right. Note to myself, don't go to Todd first on the quick questions. All right. Here we go. Elevators can drive the timeline. Andy, our elevators are 40 years old just today, right now. They're not working well. It's not the building's fault. It's not management's fault. They're old. Why weren't the money put aside? Why didn't they replace them? 20 years ago, why didn't put the money? They weren't going to last forever. Somebody new? Tell me, Andy, why? Why?
I don't know. And to put it in perspective, I believe you have Westinghouse elevators, a name from the past. Look, I had a building once that felt their amenity was they had an old elevator with the crank, with the arm, and they thought that was actually an amenity of the building, and they refused to upgrade it and get rid of the elevator operator. So that old equipment, believe it or not, you're getting 40 years out of it. You're not getting that from any newer equipment, but I could tell you they recognize the age of the elevators. Elevators are very complex. And by the way, you never really replace an elevator, which is why we call them modernizations. You pretty much you can do everything but the car frame, the rails in there. And, there's all kinds of, you don't really do the whole thing, but elevators are going to be very expensive. The higher your building, the more elevators, the type of elevator, whether it's a shaft or tension or piston, they're complicated. And by the way, they're one of the most important pieces of a high rise. That's how you get from your apartment to the lobby. And if I remember one of the big 4 elevator companies said to me, it's the most used form of transportation in the world. The elevator.
It's like a 20-minute wait for our elevators today. But like, who do you blame? Nobody. By the way, Andy, I completely disagree with you. I know what building you're talking about because you told me about it. I love the idea that guy sits there with the old thing. And I would agree with the owners. That's an amenity. I would not lose it. I would keep whatever that guy is with the thing in the bar. I would never change that elevator, no matter how much it costs. I would keep it forever. But that's just my opinion. But I don't have to manage the building either. Okay. Todd, elevators. They're so underestimated, I think, aren't they?
Yes, but a reserve say for a high rise might be 100 line items, but there's only a handful, 10 or less sometimes, that control the funding. And elevator control system modernization is certainly one of those, especially for traction elevators. The taller buildings will have traction type elevators. This is a little bit, we can really be at this kind of all day, but I'll make this fast. Those old school mechanical relay controls can last a long time as long as you have a guy who knows what he's doing, knows how to fix them, you can find replacement parts. They can last way longer than the new programmable logic controls. But these new programmable logic controls, the issues, lack of replacement parts, obsolescence, priority parts. It can be quite challenging. And the challenge here is you want to get to the elevator systems, really have a plan in place before you start having major service interruptions, before you start having extended service interruptions. Obviously, a major issue for elevators. One real quick note on elevators, just because it's an interesting story. We're talking about preventative maintenance. We had a elevator contractor, a very large one, come in and teach us, hey, what should we look for when we're analyzing an elevator? First thing they said, is the room clean? Is the control room clean? How clean do they keep the room? Because that has such a major impact on these control systems, which I found that pretty interesting, pretty basic, but super important.
Dawn, I'm so angry about the elevators. This is a perfect example of reserves. You know how I'm angry at? People like 40 years ago that didn't do reserves for these elevators, because the elevators aren't going to last forever. They're 40 years old. They can't get parts for them anymore. I just feel like this is so unfair that I have to deal with this, and I'm going to have to pay to have the elevators probably upgraded with an assessment or something. Do you feel sorry for me?
I do, but I do, of course. I think a lot of people underestimate the convenience of the elevator. I lived in a high rise in Jersey City for a long time. And for my exercise, I used to run up and down the stairs, and the elevator would go out. So I would have to run up and down the stairs. But, you know, it can be very dangerous, though, on the other hand. And from an insurance standpoint, there's injuries that can occur. There's obviously the complaints that someone might threaten to sue or actually do sue. And then, of course, there's noise. There's the construction, the contractual transfer. And Todd brought up, what about when parts aren't available? What if there's an insurance claim? There's so much that goes into it.
I could definitely see a liability issue. Like right now, we're down to one elevator. If that elevator goes out, I'm on the 29th floor and there's a medical emergency, somebody can't get the help they need. Once again, you can't really blame anybody that's around now, but it's just a shame that we're in this position. Okay, Andy, you were so excited about this. I know, I think that you have a love and hate relationship with facades.
Oh yeah.
What what do you think? They're a big item, right?
Yeah, they're not only is it the biggest aesthetic of a building, it's the look, but they vary. Especially the older facades have these intricate terracotta pieces. They're very ornate. They've got these metal workings in there. They're brick. Sometimes they have large cast stone or like slate stone or granite. I'm sorry, not slate, limestone sometimes. And then you got more modern like glass systems, or my most hated, which is called EIFS or EIFS. It's basically a styrofoam with plaster over it. But they're all different, and the approach to a facade can primarily be driven by the board or the building's ability to stomach a large capital expenditure and timing or phasing of a project. Access, I believe Todd mentioned early on in this episode here, is access sometimes drives what you do to a facade. More complicated high rises you have to have what's called mast climbers, which are elevators erected versus just hanging from a swing. They're all over the place, and a reserve study may or may not target it exactly. They're going to kind of spread that out because you never replace a facade. You actually just repair it over time, and you can do it in phases, or you could do it all at once, and that has to be decided. That's where capital planning comes in versus reserve study. I may have jumped ahead there.
I'm so glad Andy said that, Todd, because that's what I was going to say. Like our facade here, we have a major repair project for like 3 years. Andy, can you share or you can't, how much it was total or?
Well, that was balconies.
Balconies.
Those were balcony.
But our facades have been messed up too. We've had the caulking, but
balconies I sometimes consider, if you look at a reserve study, they're typically going to put the balconies with the exterior components of the facade because oftentimes they jive. They're part of the
balconies yet. They're next.
Okay, then we want to keep the balconies out.
The reason I got excited what Andy said though, Todd, was they didn't do a good job caulking the windows here. Like at some point somebody messed it up. I don't know when. And it leaked like crazy. Now, is that part of reserve's plan to have the finances in place, Todd, to get a project like that done properly? Because it made a huge difference here. And I think somebody had to come out and replace the caulking. Facades are tricky. And I think like Andy's saying, you have to pay like so much attention to them and have a real plan.
As Andy mentioned, access is such a huge part of this entire facade discussion. If you're on the building, however you're on that building, address everything you can, from whatever the facade system is, repairs to that, the sealants, the caulk around windows, if it's balconies. As long as you have that contractor on the building, part of that project should be everything that you can possibly address. It all works together too. If your sealants are not in great shape, that's going to damage your facade. So it all is integral together. In fact, my favorite part of this job is visiting vintage high rises, the vintage masonry high rises. I love the architecture, just beautiful workmanship. But I know there's a problem. There's always something to do, and it's always really expensive.
I feel like Andy hates those places.
Yeah.
I do. Like, he doesn't like the elevator guy. I could sense like you find the facade. I know, like, it's because it's your job and it's, people don't want to pay for it and they complain, and then you have to try to fix things. I feel like you don't like the architecture, Andy. You didn't like the elevator. You just want everything to be plain and simple because you're in the management business.
I'm intrigued by the older facades of the older buildings. That one of the challenges we run into is when they're historically designated, because oftentimes there are newer materials out there that can be a lot cheaper, not only to put them in, but or just by a unit cost of buying the material. But if your building's historically registered, you may have to replace it with the exact same stuff that they built it with in the early 1900s. It depends on, I guess, the historic commission. In Philadelphia, they're a little more lax about it when it's 20 stories up versus if it's like 5 at visual level. For instance, I had a building that had terracotta balconettes, they called them, and they were, I believe, some kind of limestone. And we were able to get historic approval to change it to a cast concrete. They laser scanned the original frame and they rebuilt them with concrete rather than chiseling them out of some quarry in northern New York State. And I think it saved like $500,000 in material alone. But no, I don't hate the facades. They're very finicky, and you got to plan accordingly, as we were saying.
Why couldn't your staff chisel them? You don't do that?
I think it's on their job descriptions.
Okay. Dawn, I could see if you're not careful with your insurance, under insuring this stuff for sure, right? Because unless somebody comes out there and takes a look at it and asks, I didn't even realize it, but can you run with that?
Well, here's the thing, injuries, right? So the facade is deteriorating, and in New York City, we have laws with scaffolding and the erection of that. And then there's also the aspect of the injuries that occur and what damages can be paid and who's at fault. Mostly what I'm always concerned in these situations is, number one, what is the exterior? Because EIFS, or the exterior insulation finishing system, people will argue with me, well, it's not that type of EIFS, it's this, it's not an EIFS. In our insurance industry, any type of application to the external surface of the building is going to be an EIFS. And majority of our insurance carriers are not going to want to insure it, even if it's decorative. And that's what we see at a lot of the high rises, more of the decorative EIFS, because there's water intrusion issues. So water intrusion, typically not covered, and then it starts to deteriorate the building. And that's where we see the issues with, for example, what happened with Surfside. You start to see that with the columns, or it can result in, unfortunately, where you could have a collapse, and collapse is not covered by insurance. The facade really kind of leads to the inside of the building and the overall health.
You know what I was thinking? No, like, went right to where you should. Something's going to fall on somebody, right? I was thinking when Andy was talking about, because I never thought about this, under insuring because there's a historical aspect and you can't replace it. Like, if somebody doesn't tell, hold on, Dawn, if somebody doesn't tell you that, how would you know? And then you're only going to insure for a certain value, and you're going to be stuck, right? They'll replace something with like product, or maybe like Andy's saying, these architectural things are trickier than they look. I guess people have to be careful who they use for insurance for that, right?
Yes, they do. And a lot of our insurance carriers actually will not take on, just like EIFS, they will not take on historic designated buildings. There are only a very limited specialized group. And why? The ordinance, for example, the code upgrades that need to be done in a historic building there after an insurance loss. There's also the aspect from a historic preservation, as you pointed out, those items that are not there available. So we can't do a true replacement cost. Maybe we're going to look at an agreed value or assumptions other than. So it can be very costly, much more greater than, as both pointed out, then what materials are that could be substituted but are not allowed because of the historic nature.
Okay, so Andy, we know that you're getting rid of the old guy that does the elevator thing with the lever. We know that you don't like the limestone or whatever that thing was. It's so complicated where people have to chisel it by hand, like in the pyramids. How about balconies? You want to get rid of balconies too to simplify your life?
I want to make balcony maintenance great again. How about that kind of a joke? Now, if you do your balcony maintenance and get a proper maintenance on, they last longer. The challenge with balconies is that they're exclusive. Usually they're exclusive to an apartment, like you have your balcony, and different activities happen on different balconies based on who the person is. And also the location of your building. Like if you're on the ocean, especially on the East Coast, you're getting salt water onto a concrete balcony that's likely supported with metal rebar and metal supports. And all of that needs to be maintained properly because that water gets in the balcony, it rusts and that's actually a support more than, yeah, I know Dawn and her insurance people would be worried about pieces of facade falling. I certainly don't want a balcony collapsing, which has happened.
So Todd, Andy said it was like he made a joke, make balcony maintenance great again. When he first said it, I actually didn't think it was a joke, Andy. It's true, right? I mean, people are ignoring. People don't understand. Todd, at my building, I know I keep going, but people don't have the slightest clue about these balconies. And it's probably so frustrating for the management to have to explain that to people. Todd, people don't understand. These are super complex. I don't know. You could take it from there. They're expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the similar discussions to the facade is when we talk balcony as a high rise, in my head, I'm picturing a concrete balcony extension of the floor slab. So some of the same concepts apply. The idea is to get to the small issues before they become big issues, get those small cracks before they become big cracks, get to those issues, those minor issues before they result in spalling of that concrete, which is a safety hazard to the public, where we have seen buildings have to erect scaffolding and sidewalk protection because of that lack of deferred maintenance. So same thing with facades. Get to the minor stuff on balconies in a timely manner, get to that preventative maintenance before you have a major issue. And now the cost to repair it goes way up.
Todd, did we skip you on facades?
No, we're good. We're good.
No, but did we skip you originally? Because Andy and Dawn and I would get so excited if we want to have an engineer, we could just we completely skipped going to facades on you. Sorry about that. You're the guy that would know the most about them.
We're okay.
I do want to add in on balconies. I've actually seen more balcony claims than not, meaning from a governance standpoint, didn't fix it because it's a limited common element. Most people aren't inspecting it all the time, and owners do a lot of things on their balconies. Also, not just the the water and the salt. So balconies tend to be a big argument.
I've learned so much about balconies since I've lived here. I don't put that fencing on it because the wind catches it. It makes the railings loose. Don't put planters on there that collect water. Whatever. I wish everyone would just listen to Andy, and then everything would be so much better around here, and our balconies would last longer. All right. Todd, can you get us through this one fast? Because it's so obvious, and I want to make sure we get to the other ones. Roofs.
Roofing systems on a high-rise structure. So the game that's played here is to replace that roofing system before you damage the components beneath the membrane. So, for example, before that insulation is saturated and not usable, maybe you can overlay that roof. If you get to the project in a timely manner, maybe you can overlay that membrane depending on what type of roof you have and the material. But if you wait too long, too many leaks, that insulation is not reusable again. Can't do that, and the cost is going to be much higher. So replace that roof system just as you start having some serious problems. And as Andy noted, flat membrane roof systems, modified bitumen, EPM, thermoplastic, they're one of the components where well-maintained roofing systems, great preventative maintenance, can extend that useful life a decent amount, a respectable amount. So stay up with your preventative maintenance on flat roofs.
You know what I learned here, Andy? I thought was great. I guess they check our roof every day.
Well, there's mechanical equipment up there, but a famous developer that I'm familiar with, this will tell you everything you need to know about roofs. When he bought into one of the buildings he developed, he bought the floor under the one that's under the roof. So
Right.
The second to tallest roof or unit. One of the challenges, I live in a single family home. If I have a roof leak, I call a roofer, he fixes it. In a high rise, the roof's common, and a lot of times that roof leak may start 100 feet, or depending on the size of the building, 50 feet away, you don't know where it is. It's trial and error. That those owners on the top floor could be going through hell to determine where a leak's coming from. They may not even see it until it's too late. And then often the challenge comes when that has to be replaced. They also bear the brunt of the pain of the construction. The other thing, we talk about roofs, but a lot of times in a high rise, it's most importantly is how is it draining water? Because it's collecting, it's a giant swimming pool. And if you've been on a large high rise roof, you'll see they've got floor drains that are the size of like sometimes 6 to 8 inches large. And the reason, like you mentioned, they go up there every day is one, especially if you live near the ocean, sometimes seagulls bring up chicken bones. There's stuff blowing around. You got to keep those drains clear, because otherwise you will end up with a swimming pool if your drains aren't clear.
Seagulls bring up chicken bones. You're only talking about Atlantic City boardwalk seagulls. Most seagulls don't eat chickens, Andy. They eat fish.
No, I'll find this picture from 2011.
Right.
I have of a corner of a roof. There must have been 150 bones, the chicken bones. But the birds would bring. This is in Philadelphia. They're right on the river, Delaware River. The seagulls bring up, they eat and they leave it, and eventually the weather brought it into the corner of the building. Crazy.
I'm so guilty myself of getting us off track. All right, let's move quickly. So I'm going to make a statement because there's a couple key points I want you guys to get to. Really quick. Just tell me if it's true or false, Todd. Parking structures. There's a lot of hidden things you're not going to know. And if you don't get an expert in there to check things out, you're going to have big problems. You could have a collapse. You're going to get sued. People are going to get hurt. Don't mess around with your parking structures. Problems are not as obvious as they seem.
Well, what a fantastic topic, especially in cities where they use de-icing chemicals during the winter time. So that even a little bit of de-icing chemical reaching that reinforcing steel within a concrete parking structure, that's a process you can't reverse. Might look good for a long time on the top surface, the underside, right, but even little cracks that allowing de-icing chemicals reach that reinforcing steel will result in spalling of the concrete and massive repair projects. It is really tough, especially at new high rises, to convince boards of the need to maintain that top surface. That might be a traffic bearing membrane on that top surface to prevent that water infiltration, because things could look good for a long time and then all of a sudden they really accelerate into big dollar projects.
Okay, we're going to move fast. You ready for this one? Plumbing projects disrupt everyone. Andy, can you keep it short and just press people to pay attention to their plumbing, because it's more than just fixing it. If you can't use your toilet, it's a problem.
Yeah, depending on the building and how well it was either planned out or plumbed, if someone has a leak that needs to be addressed, you often have to shut the whole building down or a significant portion to make that repair, because you can't repair a pipe that's full of flowing water. Smarter buildings put in shut-off valves strategically when they can. But yeah, plumbing disrupts everyone. And what's even worse than water is when it's sewage. And aging buildings, sewer pipes, and even the water supply pipes are now 50, 60 years old. No one put in the reserve study, by the way, to replace all the internal pipe systems. And you typically end up doing that as needed. But I've seen buildings where you could put your finger through the sewage vertical pipe because it's been so eroded over the years.
Andy, I have a question for you. How come every time I get an email that the plumbing's going to be done, I have to go to the bathroom immediately?
Well, because you probably don't think about going to the bathroom.
Then I really have to use the restroom and I can't use it. Why does that happen?
You could still use it. There's probably enough residual pressure to
just one time.
Yeah, just the one time, you know. Okay. Or just don't flush and just spray some air freshener. I don't know what to tell you.
Dawn, we got to move fast. Fire and life safety. You touched upon it already. Can you please push the point?
There's really limited egress, which means it's difficult to exit. So life safety and the components, the fire sprinkler system, where it's located, is it common areas? Is it just the units? And a lot of our older buildings, we will tend to see only the first floor, the lobby area, common areas, trash chutes sometimes only, that are sprinklered. Our carriers want to see a full life sprinkler system. They want to know about the standpipes. They want to know about the maintenance of them. This is critical. And if you're not getting the annual inspections, that's a problem. And it's not just the inside, it's the exterior. It's the connections so that the fire department can arrive. And a lot of times those are overlooked.
All right, we got 2 minutes, so we'll try to go quick. Todd, inflation not only is part of like how much your bread costs, you better pay attention to it for your reserve study. Is that true?
Yeah, not just inflation, supply chain issues, the pandemic related pricing that we went through, labor shortages, just overall contractor shortages as well. All of that plays a role in these costs going up more than just inflation.
All right, Andy, please push these through quickly. And I think they're so important, which is kind of unfair to you. Residents need early communication. How important is that?
It's actually makes or breaks a good board and or management team on a building, because there should never be an emergency special assessments are easily explained because it's usually coupled with a disaster. Unfortunately, a lot of times in Dawn's world, the insurance may or may not pay out enough and we got to get something repaired, so we need a little bit more money from you. But when you need to repair the elevators, we need to talk about it now if we're going to do it in 3 years, so everybody's prepared and they understand. And we're going to talk about it every month for 3 years until we actually have to ask you for money for the elevator. It just makes it a lot smoother of a softer of a landing.
Plus, people will come in for free if you're listening. Todd most likely will come in for free and talk about it. Andy will come in for free and talk about it. Dawn will come in for free. You have professionals that will come and set the story ahead of time. Don't wait until the last minute.
Even a little bit of de-icing chemical reaching that reinforcing steel within a concrete parking structure, that's a process you can't reverse. Might look good for a long time on the top surface, the underside, right, but even little cracks that allowing de-icing chemicals reach our reinforcing steel will result in spalling of the concrete and massive repair projects. It is really tough, especially new high rises, to convince boards of the need to maintain that top surface. That might be a traffic bearing membrane on that top surface to prevent that water filtration, because things could look good for a long time and then all of a sudden they really accelerate into big dollar projects.
Plan cost before the panic starts, plan before the special assessment. Aging buildings require more planning. All right, take us out. We got about, well, we're a little bit over time, but Todd, closing thoughts.
Yeah, closing thoughts real fast to high-rise systems, maintaining a high-rise building. Maintaining the investment of the owners at a high-rise building is far more complicated than maintaining the investment of the owners at some of these smaller townhomes or HOAs. Much bigger job.
Dawn.
Essentially, capital projects aren't construction decisions. They're governance, financial, and liability decisions. But my opinion is that the biggest exposure doesn't come from the project itself. It actually comes on how the project's financed, as we said before, communicated, and what we didn't get to is how it's contracted. But communication is the biggest part of that.
Andy, take us out. Great topic. Thank you so much for suggesting it.
It's not just the treasurer's job to plan. Every board member should be actively thinking about the next large project, and every resident should be asking questions about that so that they're all informed as to what's going on, because even the board members are residents and will pay if there's a special assessment.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for letting me rush you. I appreciate it so much. And I hope to see everybody soon. And thanks everybody for watching. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.